This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library of
You can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price that you can get Truefire All Access for. I've been someone who's maybe changed my view on PRS a couple of times. I've been, I guess, like maybe many of you guys, where it's kind of like, look, I don't really get what's going on with this brand. It's like, oh, what are these birds about? The shapes might look a bit funny, you know. Why would I want a John Mayer signature guitar at all? To being in a state where actually, like, if you see anyone speaking from Gibson, Fender, like the guys at the top of those companies, do they sound like they're talking to you about guitars particularly? And having dealt with some of these companies, it's interesting to me, you know, like, you know, one of the big companies, like, they specifically said they weren't looking for an honest review of a pedal. So if I didn't like it, maybe just demo something else. That wasn't Fender, by the way. But Fender is just like quite a huge company. PRS, on the other hand, it sent me Christmas cards, even though really I've not done too much with them. Some sort of indicator of A, I guess, that they're trying to get on the side of people like me, but B, that there's something a little bit different going on with this company. I think it does really come down to who's at the top of the company. And Paul Reed Smith, so I just caught this Beato video. I was just scrolling through YouTube and this came up and I was like, I was already making a video on the PRS S2 guitars today and I thought I should watch this. And imagine the balls on a guy who's going to show up to Rick Beato's studio, knowing that there's going to be millions of people potentially that are going to watch that. He's going to show up with Tim Pierce and they're going to start off with this idea that we're going to shoot out some vintage Strats and we'll find some of the best examples we can find. So I think it was 4 vintage Strats, like a 55, a couple of 62s, and then a 63 sort of parts caster. And then he's not going to shoot out a core Silver Sky with it. He's going to bring along, firstly, an NF3, which doesn't even have single coil pickups in it, right? And also a Silver Sky SE. And I just thought that was really, like, interesting that he'd do that. And I thought, let's kind of talk about it. So I think even the most vehement PRS hater would say that takes quite a lot of bravery to say, right, I'm going to send a PRS Silver Sky SE into the mix with 4 golden era Fender guitars, like all pre-CBS. And all, this is one of the really key points that Paul made in the video that I'd not really seen said in this way. As a guy that used to be a repairman, Paul was saying that he'd bought a 58 Gibson Les Paul Special, and none of the frets were level. So as a repairman, what he had to do, or they had to do, was level the fretboard, level the frets, and kind of get a guitar up to playing standard. And he kind of pointed out that that's maybe what people are noticing that they like in some cases about these vintage examples, it's not just that it's an old piece of wood and it's an old guitar with loads of mojo, but it's also a guitar that has, in a lot of cases, been refretted. The fretboard might have been leveled. You know, Eric Johnson, I think, on his Strats would have it re-radiused as well. You might have jumbo frets put on there, and I think that's quite an interesting thing that's been described that I've not really seen talked about too much. But also, the real key point for me here is that Paul Reed-Smith, the guy at the top of PRS, is a guy that is actually interested in vintage guitars and does respect what was being done at the time, and I think tries to take some of those elements, and you see this like with the McCarthy guitars, and take them into his own instruments, but is also willing to try different stuff. So another thing that he was saying about the Silver Sky SE was that the bridge pickup, anything that they got out of that facility in court, the bridge pickup was particularly thin. And Beato asked him, so what did you do to change that? And apparently between each of the coils, there's a small piece of metal to thicken up the sound, which is kind of not, I've not heard someone else describe that. I've not really heard someone be as candid about that, about A, the pickups sounded a little bit thin coming out initially, and then B, we did this thing to improve that. I thought that was really interesting as well, and I quite like seeing this side of Paul Reed-Smith, where it's like, this is the guy that's at the top of the company. Like, is he really interested in guitars? Yes. Does that flow down through almost all of their design choices and the stuff that they do? I think so. Now, I think that's what makes PRS a little bit different in some ways. At the top of some of these bigger companies, it's like people that might have worked for Adidas, all that sort of stuff. And you think, are these guitarists even? And some of the decisions that are made around some of this stuff, I think, is echoed down through product lines, right? So I don't know if Tim Pierce was being charitable and Beato. One of the things that I found with the Silver Sky SE and the NF3, when I played them versus the Core, let alone next to a vintage Strat, was that I found like there is like it definitely, the satin feel of the neck doesn't feel quite as quality. Other aspects of it are great, especially for the money. I found that they were a really good guitar. I've not played too many vintage guitars, but Paul's done this as well. He took an SE to that pedal show, and obviously Mick at that pedal show has a vintage Strat, a couple of them. I think he's got like a 60s and a 70s. I just think it's a really fascinating idea that someone's willing to put their product in front of those kind of instruments, and that's the kind of the test. And he also said that he'd gone to the Sphere and Joe Walsh had bought a PRS SE guitar, and you can see, you know, Joe Walsh is gigging that thing. And I think that's another really fascinating point as well. You know, like, wherever the guitar is made, Paul has said that it should be the case that you can essentially gig that thing. And, you know, with the PRS SE guitars, they're taking each of them that come into America and checking them and doing QC over there in the USA. I think Sir were, some of the first to do that kind of idea with the Sir Rasmus. Those were built overseas, then brought back over to Sir for the kind of final inspection and like a bit of QC. I think that's a really interesting way to do things, and I just think PRS are doing things a little bit different. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. You don't have to love the guitars. You don't have to love the person. And maybe even still, this wouldn't convince you that a PRS is the right instrument for you. But I like the attitude. I like the idea that you'd go to Beato and you'd say, right, I've got these 4 vintage Strats, and now I'm going to stick a Silver Sky SE into the mix. Incidentally as well, when you hear it back, I feel like the SE stood up tonally pretty well with those vintage Strats. The other thing was that the NF3, which I found for myself, definitely was a way darker tone, So that was interesting, and that was replicated in Beato's studio as well. So I don't know, I thought it was an interesting video that I would encourage anyone who is a PRS hater to watch as well. Yeah, I thought it to me did a pretty good job of putting across what it is that Paul seems to be interested in. Aside from, of course, like it being a company and that, I do really think that across the range, what he says is like he's trying to get across, you know, if he opens up that case, that the customer thinks that I've got, you know, a good guitar for the money, whatever that amount of money is spent. It can't just be, you know, so that's going to be an intensely personal thing, but I do like that idea in general. Still, it's Mayer's guitar, innit?